everybody, it's Romania Black, and we are on episode 26 of Monster. Yeah, last episode, we got introduced to Karl and Lotte, who are students at Munich University, and Karl has been reading to old of Hans Schubert, this famous, maybe not famous, but this millionaire that has people come and read Latin stories to him, and he is the Tuesday reader. And all this mystery was set up with the Thursday boy, the Thursday reader that supposedly perhaps Schubert possibly thinks is his son, even though we find out that Karl is his actual son. And we had speculated that maybe Johan was the Thursday boy, and then we find out no, the Thursday boy, who's supposedly this god of destruction, come from like a Nostradamus prediction, committed suicide. But then we meet the Friday boy, who is Johan. I was like, oh my god! So the question is, was the Thursday boy originally Johan and he became the Friday boy after he got there to throw people off the trail? Who knows? Who knows? But I really like Karl's character. I like Karl's character a lot. He's a nice guy. He doesn't want money. He's not after Schubert's inheritance. He just wants to know about his father, who was the man that abandoned basically him and his mother. Why did he do so? And what's the deal? And I honestly, my thing is, I want Karl to find answers. I want Karl to get answers to the questions that he has about Schubert and why he abandoned his mom. But is he going to get those answers, or is Johan going to make his move first? Is Johan going to, because I think Johan is after Schubert for his money because the company he was originally at has disbanded now amidst all the chaos. I think that Johan is just using Schubert for his money, and then he's going to axe him once he gets the inheritance. But I want Karl to find out about his dad before that happens, right? To get some peace of mind. But this is Monster, and that may not happen. So we didn't have Timma at all. We know that Timma and Dieter and them are on the trail headed to Munich to try to meet up and find a lead on Johan, not realizing Johan's a student there. Nina, meanwhile, is kind of on the same trail, right? She's headed the same direction. So it's all leading up to them coming together, right? To all meet up at some point. But we're on episode 26. And I'm like, what is going to happen with Karl? I get bad vibes when Johan, this is the first time we've seen Johan in like 10, 15 episodes, right? Face to face. So I'm a bit freaked out about it. But we'll see, right? We'll see, Maybe everything will be fine. I just want Karl to be okay and to get answers. But it's Monster, and we don't know if that's going to happen or not. So, but in any case, I'm excited, y'all. I hope you all are too. But we are going to start Monster and just see what happens, right? And we're going to dive in and find out here in 3, 2, 1. And let's find out. Huh. What? We got a lot of Johan in this episode, and I am terrified of Johan. I am absolutely terrified of him. So, the two Johans. Okay. This episode. Okay, so we have Johan, right? Let's talk about Johan. What's fascinating is the more we got into this episode, and the more that Karl and Johan had conversation, the more it becomes apparent how similar Karl and Johan are, which is kind of crazy, to the point where I was like, I felt like the butterfly meme where it comes down like, is this a new ship in Monster? Although I want to be like, I want Karl to stay alive, and I think being with Johan is a very good guarantee that you will not be alive, so maybe don't do that. But we've got so much that's with Karl and Johan, and then Johan himself. So we're gonna put Karl. We'll put Karl here. Old Karl here, and then Johan. We'll do the two of them side by side as Huckleberry demands that I throw things to him. But we also have a lot of other things going on too. We have the psychotherapy center, right? So we have that. We're going to put that out to the side as well as being something we should take note of. So we're going to put some plot things to keep track of because it's a three-parter. It's not even a two-parter. We got a three-parter now. I'm like, dang it. Dang it, show. Dang it, show. You're getting it to where I've got to watch the next episode. No. So, okay. So we have like a three-parter going on, right? Yes. So, okay. What we need to break down is that we have this Reichwein psychotherapy unit in Munich, right? Where we're talking about the detective who hasn't had a drink since. He says, as long as you stay away from alcohol, you can get a fresh start. So let's talk about here our, we have an alcoholic detective who was a cop of 7 years. And he's been going to see this psychotherapist to help get sober, right? He's got to help get sober. We realize the consequences of his alcoholism later on in the episode, which we will touch base on. But yeah, he's like, you need to keep coming here to get a fresh start. He says, as long as I keep meeting with you once a week, I won't be able to drink. So he's like, it's one of those things where he's like, I'm afraid of your thunder. He's like, I need someone to keep me on the straight and narrow. I need somebody to be a constant anchor for me to keep me doing this thing. And he's like, you are the one that is going to do that for me, right? So here we go. He's like, thunder, what do you mean by that? He's like, this is counseling. And he says, I don't even have time to drink. He's like, I'm too busy. I've been working on my first important case since becoming a detective. So it's almost, you know what the weird thing is? It's almost like they treat the detectives as like a step down from the police because you have Lunge and they're like, he's a detective. He goes after cases. And then this guy, it's like, well, he was a cop, but now he's a detective. It's like it's repurposing him, realigning him with a different position within the same unit. That's kind of where it's at. And it's like, it just doesn't seem to have as much clout. And he's like, my first case. And so he gives him the picture of Edmund, who looks kind of like Johan. A wee bit, right? Just a wee bit like Johan. Not as handsome, and I'm sure did not have the voice. Johan's voice is terrifying because of how soft and beautiful it is. It's like the most snake-tongued, silvery, beautiful voice you've ever heard. I'm like, it just makes your skin like you just, but it's like Karl says, it makes your skin crawl. And at the same time, though, it makes your skin crawl because you know what he's capable of. That's the scary thing. But when he talks to you, if you didn't know any better, you'd be like, wow, he seems like a really inviting person, which is absolutely terrifying. So yeah. All right, what do you make of this man? So he shows him a picture of Edmund, and he's like, do you think that he's like, you're famous for he says for physiognomy, which is the prediction of a person's characteristics based on their face. I thought for a second, if he had a picture of Johan, he might be able to like determine some things about him. I would be very curious if this guy saw a picture of Johan. I really want the psychotherapist to see a picture of Johan and determine something from it. And he just like drops the photo and can't do anything. That would be kind of crazy, right? But instead it's of Edmund. He wants to know, like, does this guy look like somebody, based on your judgment, that could commit suicide? And Richard. So Richard is the detective. There we go. Old Dick the detective, right? So we have Richard. I was trying to think of what his name was, and it's only said like a few scant times, but Richard. Richard is the detective. And he's like, I'm not a fortune teller. And he's like, yeah, I know. It's a skill, and you've had experience. You can look at someone and kind of tell. You can determine their personality at a glance. And the therapist kind of says, he's like, well, it's my experience of talking to clients. He's like, I kind of need to speak with them before I can really make a judgment. So the fact that he's just looking at this photo and saying something about it is maybe meaning it's not entirely accurate. He just wants to know if he's a crook or not. Is this man possibly a crook? And he's like, oh no. He's like, he is not that. In fact, he doesn't have the face of a swindler. It's like he couldn't be. He's the type of guy who would break down if he ever got someone to go for his scam. Yeah, he's basically saying he's weak-willed, seems cowardly, and kind of weak-minded. So, talk about this. Now, it's obvious Johan was the one that was with Edmund when they went and saw the fake Margot, right? So, here's the thing. We have two... Again, the monster is splitting in half, right? It's like the ED, right? It's splitting in half. So you have The Johan that took Edmund to Margot and knew that Edmund was weak-minded. Yeah, and cowardly and weak-willed. Like, he's not somebody that would commit suicide. I'm very certain that Johan killed him, right? But the question is, why? What's the purpose? Why kill Edmund? Was it because he got too close to Schubert and was going to tell him, and then that would throw off whatever Johan's plans with Schubert were? Is that the case? We don't know that. But the detective Richard kind of figures out that, okay, based on this psychotherapist, he's not somebody that would commit suicide. And then they talk about, everybody knows Hans, Schubert. They know he's the vampire of Bayern. He's like the wealthiest man. Like, anybody would want a piece of his fortune. And so the fact that this kid says that he's his son is kind of a big deal. He's like, he's the one who hired me, says Richard. And he's like, he's the man in the photo called himself his son. And again, Richard kind of deduces, like, yeah, the Hans guy has, blue eyes, even though they've gone blind. He probably had blonde hair. It would be easy for a blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy to, to pose as his son, right? And he's so eager to kind of pay back that guilt of leaving behind the wife or the mom of Karl that he's willing to accept, Edmund as his son to kind of clear away his guilt. He says Schubert completely believed him. It was a quite clever trick. It took me a lot of work to determine whether or not he was a fake, but there's still one mystery left. And that's, how did he know so much about Schubert's son that he could make Schubert believe him? Yeah, that's kind of the crazy thing here. So how did Edmund convince Schubert that he was his son? So that begs the question of, did Johan feed Edmund info to convince Schubert? Now, the weird thing about all of this is that if Johan was feeding, if Johan was giving information to Edmund to try to make him more convincible as the son, being like, look, you can get money this way, then what do we do with Karl's story? Because Karl, he told Johan about his past and upbringing. Like, did he get Karl to tell him a story once he found out that he was the real kid? Is he going to use Karl's identity and story to pass himself off as Schubert's son? Is Johan going to do that to get the money? Because I think he would. I think he would do that. I think, knowing that Karl doesn't want the money, I think he would take Karl's story, pass it off as his own, and get the money himself. But that's assuming that it's the Johan that's... We're talking about Johan. We're going to talk about Johan. Oh, man. This whole episode giving us so much. It's like, what the fudge? Yeah, how did he know all this? And then Edmund's committed suicide, so we can't ask him. How convenient. How convenient. So anyway, it says the secret woods. So we have Martin, and Martin is the cop who worked with Richard. And he's very short with Richard. He doesn't want to work with Richard. He's kind of done with him. And then you kind of figure out why that is later on, of why they don't want to work anymore. But all Richard wants is just to be able to go look at the crime scene. He's like, I've been hired by this rich guy to figure out the case. So throw me a bone. Help me out here. It's like, just show me Edmund Feyren's last note. And they're like, no, we've already checked the handwriting. We know it's his handwriting. But he could have been coerced. He could have been forced to write it. Johan could have told him to write the note. We don't know, right? We don't know. There's no doubt he wrote the letter. And he's like, we have two witnesses, Karl Newman and Lotte Frank. Which is funny that Karl's last name is Newman, like new man. And then he's meeting with Johan. Right? And you have Liebert. It's kind of like liberate. It's... He's like, we don't have enough men. So yeah, Martin kind of establishes, he's like, I don't have time for this case. The case is closed. It's been ruled a suicide. He's like, we are short-handed. And the Martin guy almost makes it seem like it's kind of like, it's to the fault of Richard that they're shorthanded. He's like, we had another cop on the case, but now he's a detective and he can't help us. So what do we do with that? It's kind of like he just kind of throws it in Richard's face. And I like Richard. Richard has like the little trait of, he goes, has like the side smile. Like that's kind of like a cocky grin. Like that's Richard's trait. I like that characterization with him. I haven't had any rest since I took your place. So yeah, he's a little bit resentful that Richard is no longer on the group, and that he took Richard's place. Right? And we get a little bit extra with Richard about him in this. That he says, I haven't had any rest since I took your place. And Richard's like, well, you've gotten pretty arrogant. Like, I've asked you to stop calling me Martin the Blockhead. You're not my boss, and I'm not your subordinate anymore. Like, there's definitely that power shift in their relationship, and it's one of those things where now Martin doesn't have to answer to Richard, so he very much does not want to. He's like, you don't understand the trouble we went through that time. We spent all that time tracking down that serial killer, and you shot him in a drunken stupor. You don't know the trouble we had after that. So he's suggesting that they had a serial killer in their clutches, and Richard, while he was drunk, shot the suspect and ruined the entire case. And he's like, we had to deal with the aftermath. It was a mess, all this, and you were too drunk to know what was going on. So that, I liked what Monster does in that it establishes a plot and a narrative without giving you the exact details. Like, it doesn't detail every little thing that happened, but Monster gives you just enough to where you kind of know what's going on. And you can kind of read between the lines and fill in the gaps. And I love Richard's reaction. Richard just like smirks, like you can tell he's kind of like, inside he's like screaming internally and put off by it because he knows his alcoholism has, had a really negative effect, and he's been working on that. But I doubt that he tells Martin that. I doubt that he just comes right out and says that to Martin. Why would you? Right? And he's like, can I ask you to leave now? We don't have time to deal with a simple suicide. Yeah, this entire case was made to look simple. Look like it actually happened. There's nothing complicated about it. There's no frills, no glamour. It was very emotionless. Just that was it. And then Richard's like, what about the scene of the crime? And they're like, we're boxing up all the stuff. And luckily he makes it in. Luckily, Richard runs over and makes it in like right before the movers manage to get there, right? The traders are coming up to pick up his belongings. It all happens very quickly, right? It all happens super quick. The idea that they instantly were like, got the things, got everything loaded up, got it all put away, and they're just leaving it. It seems like everything's getting cleaned up rather quickly. And I think that's by design and intent to sweep everything under the rug. Oh, Edmund's dead, and that's it. And we don't have to think any more about it. We don't have to worry about Johan and his participation in the scene of the crime because he was with Edmund, we come to find out. So yeah, there's some loose ends there. Like Margot, I'm surprised Margot's still alive, honestly. The fact that she's seen Johan, I find it suspicious that she's still alive. That they haven't taken care of her so that she doesn't blab about Johan being there. So then he talks about the last words as he wrote this letter out. And we see, I like that we have birth of a tragedy, assumptions and reality, psychology of the world, like all these things that are tying to the themes of this series and philosophy are right there on the bookshelf. And then he sees the really random book that was about Latin, and he underlined the phrase, and I want to see exactly what it was there. Nike, Amicia, Populi Romani, Defecturus, Confirmavit. Like the ones he had underlined there. I thought it was going to be something about monsters. The fact that it's about Caesar and the Gallic War is interesting. I don't know my history very well, especially European history, so I'm sure someone in the comments will point out the importance of it being Caesar. I mean, it's too brute. Like the Caesar part is a bit on the nose, but the Gallic War, I don't know if there's anything to read into that, so might be something to look into in the comments. Very curious. I might have to research it before the next episode and see what all is with that. But I like that Richard's like, well, okay, there was just this one line that's underlined. What's the deal? And so when he came to the room 203, I thought that it was going to be Johan being the roommate. But that would be way too much of a coincidence because the police would have to, talk to the person next door automatically. So that would be too close for comfort for Johan. That's too close. We can't do that. But honestly, what it seems like is that Johan is setting Lotte and Karl up for being the murder suspects. That's what it seems like, because to be honest, you have Margot, fake Margot, who saw the kids there, who knows the one kid, Karl, thinks that he's the son. So that automatically has the detective kind of suspicious. Like, okay, we had two people claiming to be Schubert, a millionaire's son. Who's the real son? Would they have something to gain by getting rid of Edmund if we're trying to frame this up as a murder case? And if Johan was predicting there'd be a detective come onto the case to investigate, there you go. But not only that, now that they kidnapped Schubert to take him out to the woods, as per, Johan's advice, then automatically you have the guy that works the butler suspecting them that they kidnapped Schubert. And if something happens to Schubert out in the woods or wherever they're at, it would be very easy for Johan to frame them as being murder suspects and get them out of the picture so that whatever Johan is planning, nobody's in his way. Because the moment Karl said that he was, the actual son, I feel like, we'll talk about that scene on the rooftop. We'll talk about it. But I feel like Johan was like, oh, you have to go. We can't have you here anymore. But we'll talk about that. So I like that Richard, I keep wanting to call him Martin. I like that Richard does everything in his power to not forcefully enter the apartment, but he manages to keep himself in, putting his hand on the door, shoving his foot in. He's like, can you just help me translate this one passage? And this redhead next door is just nice enough to be like, I'm not getting my homework done because I'm helping you. And I'm like, as a teacher, I'm like, dude, shouldn't have procrastinated till Sunday to get the work done. Right? And then he says, I can't go on pretending. And that's when he realizes that his famous last words were he was just translating a Latin book. And that was it. Or was it? Or was it all planned out to lure Richard to finding Karl and Lotte? How involved is Johan? Speaking of Johan, we get to the rooftop. And I joke that Johan likes to hang around rooftops with water towers, but he really does. So Karl going up to the rooftop, right? And then he goes up to the rooftop, and then there is Johan. It's kind of fascinating, right? And Huckleberry's like, give me the toy. But yeah, he's like, do you like it up here too? And then standing creepily atop the water tower in the sunset is Johan planning out his next message to put on the water tower. But here's the thing. He looks so... can we talk about the two Johans? Let me get this. Ow. From Huckleberry. Grabbed it from his mouth. That's what happens. So let's talk about Johan and Karl. So Karl going up to the rooftop to watch the people below. And the whole thing he said was that they have a life he never had. And that's why it's not really envy, but it's almost kind of like wonderment that he's like, these people are living a life I have never experienced and know nothing about. But it's something that I find fascinating, which is kind of like Johan, right? Johan is on the rooftop too. All right. So Nina talked way back in episode 14 or whatnot, that there are two Johans. Now, at the time, I was like, no, not possible, not two Johans. But I'm very curious to know if the whole thing with Johan is this all a persona, or, like we said, can someone just be one person one personality, but that personality be very complex with multi-facets. Because when Johan looks down at him at first, he looks kind of like the Johan we expect, where it's creepy and it's like, oh, I don't trust him. And Karl, of course, because he's a damn ray of sunshine, is like, oh, hey there, you're Johan, right? And I'm like, dude staring creepily at you. He's like, come up here. Like that line, the way he says it, he's like, there's a much better view of the scenery from up here. But he says it with such like dead shark eyes that you're like, well, do we trust him? And Karl does, but there's like little things that he does that I'm like, he's like, there's a better view up here. And he's like, okay. I'm like, Karl, you can't be so trusting. Not of this man. No. And there's little gestures that Johan does. Like when he grabs him, he like starts to climb up the ladder and he reaches down to help him. And when he grabs him, that look where he's just like he's got his hand, like he's like, oh, you trust me. That's so nice of you. Like just, whoa, that look. And he pulls him up a little bit quicker than usual. Like he pulls him up a little bit faster than normal. And I was like, ooh. And then there's the dizzying, the height that they're from, right? And he's like, oh, it's a bit scary. And he's like, there's nothing to be afraid of. And just staring there, like standing on the edge, right? And walking across. And he's like, and Karl's like, hey, stop that. He's like, don't do that. Don't walk on the edge. But he does it anyway. Like it's nothing. It's dangerous. And he's not concerned. I would be like, red flag. If somebody was just casually walking on top of a rooftop on the little ledge that you could easily fall to your death, I would call that a red flag. But Karl is way too innocent for that. So you have Johan on the rooftop. And I'm going to put dangerous Johan over here where Johan is like straddling the edge of the building. Like he's straddling the edge of the building in this dangerous situation, not caring whether he falls off or not, right? And Karl's a little bit disturbed by it. Like, so he's like, do you come here? And then, yeah, Johan says, do you come here often? And he says, yes. All the lights in the houses come on. And so Karl and again, we don't see Johan's face when he says this. It's almost like he's waiting for Karl to explain himself. He's like, families return their homes. It smells like dinner everywhere. And then he says that it's what I've always wished for. And he's like, wished for? He's like, yeah, I never had that when I was a little boy. And then he says, how is your family? And we don't get a response. We get nothing. No response from him. Which is red flag number 2. Did I say something to hurt your feelings? And then he doesn't respond again. I was like, look. The fact that Johan's not responding to you is a little bit concerning. And it's almost like a switch is flipped. Like he asks, you wished for a family. So there's the idea with Karl that they possibly that this version of Johan wished for a normal childhood. They wished for a normal childhood that was not, as dark as it was for each of them. And he says, ever since I was a boy, I've been adopted by foster parents. And then that's when Johan says, well, can I ask you about your life? Like, again, his back is turned to Karl. And we can't tell. So if there are, in fact, 2 Johans, there is, because there's a Johan that has point blank shot a man 3 times at once, and also killed all of Wolf's men. Like, we literally know Johan was one that killed Wolf's men and killed Junkers, regardless of whether he hired people to kill the foster parents of all these serial killings or not. He literally was responsible for those people's death, and possibly the gardener. So he is capable of killing people, and in the same breath is talking about childhood basic right laws. And it's like, it just opens up this whole thing of, okay, you have a murderer, and then you have someone that's trying to advocate for children's safety. Okay, we'll talk about that here in a minute. But yeah, that whole scene where he's not on the rooftop there asking him. And again, Karl is on the ledge, just like Johan. Karl is on the ledge. Like he could, just one wrong move and he could fall, right? That's kind of where Johan is. One wrong move and he will fall into the abyss, right? Which is kind of representative of where he is if he's got this monster inside of him. One wrong move and it's just like the ED, the monster will pop out. And so then, so Karl tells him his life story. He tells him his life story to Johan, which I would not give Johan information. Johan seems to be able to do quite dangerous things with information, but okay. And so then we get the paper that talks about, the paper smacks down, and he's like, I can't go on pretending. It wasn't his last words, it was what he was translating. He's like, what does this have to do? And so then, okay, so let's go back. And then we cut back to Karl, and it's nighttime by now, and he's like, that's my life story. I was like, he told Johan everything. He told him his life story, the whole bit. Just took a couple hours. And then he says, it's a little morbid. And I was like, is it a little bit morbid? Is it now? Oh, man. So again, we have the idea of them both having morbid childhood stories. But he hasn't learned anything about Johan. That's the thing. He's told Johan everything that he would want to know, but he hasn't learned anything about Johan himself. He's like, it's strange. I feel like I can tell you anything. Like, it's just a soundboard. Like, Johan just listens to him, right? And that's when, and at this point, Johan has turned around. He's turned around facing him. Like we had one Johan facing one way, and now we have the other Johan facing back. And he says, your rich father, you know, what you just said. Are you talking about Mr. Schubert? And Karl's like, well, and when he reaches the hand, like what's scary is that Johan reaches out the hand, and in this instant, he goes, like, all he has to do is push Karl off of the ledge, and Karl's dead. There's no way he's living. No way he's surviving that. And that hand coming over, why would he have the hand come over to do that unless he was going to push him? But at the last minute, so it almost seemed like he was going to push Karl over the ledge. But then Karl turns to him and looks up. And Johan is crying. Like he can't, like he doesn't. And he reaches to grab his hand instead. Which is absolutely wild. Right? He had it towards the back of his head like he was going to throw him. And then when Karl looked up at him, instead he was crying. Crying at the story. So it's almost like Johan was thinking of doing one thing, and the moment that Karl like connected with him, a switch flipped, right? And this Johan was crying like, oh, I don't want to do that. And that the way that he grabs Karl's hand is very intimate. It's just if you look at the way he grabs it, it's like here's Karl's hand like this, and then Johan just like wraps his hand around like this. It's not a handshake. It's not grabbing it. It's a very intimate gesture, and I'm like, I don't want to ship Karl and Johan, but I kind of am. And I feel for Karl. I'm like, no, red flag. But I only say that because we know what he's capable of. Karl has no clue. And he's like, Johan, are you crying for me? Is he crying for him? So Karl questions, is Johan crying for him? I'm like, no, I don't. You could maybe look at it that way. Maybe Johan is crying because he connects with Karl's story and relates to it and is like, oh, I understand what you go to. But we don't know anything about Johan's biological father, so that may not be the case at all. Or is it Johan's crying because inside this monster in him wants to kill Karl and he's trying to fight it? Like he feels a connection with Karl and doesn't want him to die. There's a lot going on, y'all, with this. Quite a bit. So then we cut to the next day where Lottie's speaking in cryptic words. She's like, it's only natural that I, someone who takes care of Mr. Schubert, am worried. It's like, are you, Lottie Frank, a robot? But yeah, it's so bizarre, right? Because she's like, we need to do something. She says, Mr. Schubert's not eating. He really thought Edmund was his son. He's distraught about it. We need to somehow get him from dying. We can't let him die. We need to protect him. And she's like, you should take some responsibility, Karl. And Karl's like, I didn't want to do anything with this. He's like, I didn't come here to confess that I'm his son. I didn't want to do that. He's like, I just wanted to see what kind of person he was. Which again, is another connection to Johan, right? Because like Johan, Karl, he just wanted to see the type of person he was. That seems to be in a lot of veins. That seems to be Johan's main objective, is he wants to see how people react to situations. He wants to see how will they react, what will they do. Seems to be like what he's aiming at. It's like, okay, what do we do with that? So yeah, it's kind of bizarre how similar they are in what they're looking for. He's like, if I told him the truth, then he would just think I'm after the money. Yeah, that is the kind of thing I lamented with the last episode. I wanted Karl so badly to admit to Schubert that he was his son, but the timing was all wrong. If he had done it, they just got done talking about money. If he had told Schubert he was his son then, Schubert would have thought that he was just after the money to begin with, and it wouldn't have worked, right? It just would not have worked. So, oh my God. Then we have all the children. He's like, that's the kind of person Mr. Schubert is. Money is everything to him. But there's a moment here where it seems to maybe not be all to him. We'll talk about that. So we have this idea that with Schubert, that all he cares for is money. And he's like, I don't want to, he's like, that's all he cares about, and I don't want to get involved in that. He's like, because I don't want any part of it. He doesn't understand how I feel. So he's like, he doesn't care about money. He doesn't understand how I would feel as his son that he abandoned. He's like, and then Lottie's like, well, you have to do something. Your father is suffering in the abyss of despair. Okay. So we have this concept of Schubert suffering in the abyss of despair, which I said in the reaction connects to like the monster's abyss, right? The monster's abyss. Okay. And Karl does not think that Schubert understands him. Okay, so about that monster's abyss, right? That seems like a connection between Johan and Schubert, because if we believe that there's a monster inside Johan that keeps trying to burst out like the ED, then he's in this well of despair. And Nina commented on it way back when that's what she thinks the case is with Johan. But then we have all these kids playing and running around, and Karl's like trying to figure out what to do. And then right behind him, he's like, oh, I see, that's how it is. Like, oh, you don't think he'll understand. All he cares about is money. And then they're both like, oh, what? A walking red flag? I just like all these kids dancing around Johan. All these kids. He's like a Pied Piper. Like, just bring them all together. He says, I have a good idea. Like, why are these kids all dancing around him? And he's like a totally different person. So you have him with the kids that he watches. And what makes this so scary is that we know from episodes past that this same guy, Johan, that has all these children dancing around him, this same guy, like, literally stood atop a throne and watched grown adults and children kill each other. So that is like, it reminds me of, there was an analysis of No Country for Old Men. That's a movie that's been out for several years. But in No Country for Old Men, there is a character that he is terrifying because we as the audience, he's kind of like Johan. He's very calm, very cool for the most part, and collected. But there's this air about him that's very tense, and you don't exactly know how he's going to react to a situation. And so you see him do some really gruesome things, and you're like, I should be scared of this person. And then that makes every time he interacts with somebody, you just feel uneasy. And that's kind of how Johan is, because you just don't know what he's going to do. And then here he is surrounded by all these kids. So we cut back to Richard trying to figure out the whole thing with the suicide note, and Richard telling Schubert, he's like, look, this clearly there was something malicious happening. He's like, this was not a suicide. He's like, I've worked for 7 years as a cop. You can just tell some things, and this is the case. And then Schubert says, that's enough. He's like, I said that's enough. He was my son. And I don't think Schubert says they say that Schubert believes that he was his son, but I'm like, did he really believe that Edmund was his son, or was he just telling himself that to make himself feel less guilty about abandoning him? Had he just accepted that Edmund was his son to make himself feel better? Like, why did he even think that to begin with? And so, and Richard's like, look, he can't be your son. The personal history, his birthplace, none of it matches up to where you were physically in the world. We can't, there's just no way. He's a fake. And I like that Richard says it's true he wasn't a bad person. And he's not the kind of person who would try to bring you misery. Like, he didn't mean to do any harm by doing this, but he's like, he's not your kid. Like, can you not see that? Do you not see the writing on the wall? He did trick you in the end. And Schubert just doesn't say anything. And the butler comes in, he's like, let him be, let him go. And I like that Richard's like, I'm not giving up on this case. I'm not stopping. You can't make me. Try. I like how tenacious Richard is. And what's kind of cool about this is that Richard is sort of the anti-Lunge. Can we say that? We're going to come back to this. He's like an anti-Lunge. Or maybe not. But put a question mark there, because he seems to be pursuing, whereas Lunge had made up his mind about something and was like, I am hardcore going to try to prove that my way is the highway. I am right. The facts don't matter. It seems like Richard is taking the facts into account and is saying, look, here's what the facts are telling us. I'm going to now use my gut instinct and go with these facts and see what I can figure out. So Richard is actually being what I thought Lunge was going to be in all of this, but it's more Richard, who's the sober cop, the sober detective. And Schubert, he says, I feel something. Richard says, I feel there's something more malicious happening here. Like, he's going with a gut instinct, but he's trying to find proof and evidence to back it up. Whereas Lunge forgoes all the proof and evidence and just goes with his gut feeling and nothing else. That's the big difference. Yeah, Lunge is like, screw the evidence, I have gut feelings. And Richard is saying, I have gut feelings, now I need the evidence to back it up. Like, it is a bit different there, right? It's fascinating. And then there he goes. And then Schubert says, in life, there are some things you can never make up for. So, again, he's lamenting the fact that he wasn't there for his kid. So Schubert says, in life, you cannot make up for some things. And it's like, yeah, there are things that you do that you regret that you can't make up as you get older. Absolutely. And I think that's what he regrets with his son. And so Edmund was kind of a way of him finding closure in that. Whether or not it was real, he was going to convince himself of it. And he asks Richard if he understands. And Richard's like, I do. He says, I do so very well. Because, yeah, that goes back to the case where Martin was saying, like, you know, you were drunk and you shot the serial killer that we've been trying to capture all this time, and you ruined the case, and you ruined any potential for justice. And so Richard's like, yeah, I know what that feels like, to not be able to take something back. He's like, I know all too well. Interesting. I really like Richard's case. And he says he's going to keep on searching. So, yeah, so then we go to these kids. These kids, right? That are all sitting there playing ball. And he's like, a children's bill of rights. Because he's a law student, right? So he's a law student that's trying to get a children's bill of rights. And again, that part sounds great. I'm like, cool, Johan's got all these kids around him. He's trying to get a bill of rights for kids to protect their rights, like probably connecting to him as a child and how little rights he had. That sounds great. The one side of Johan that like cries for Karl, so we think, and wants to build a children's bill of rights and is around the kids, that all seems fine and dandy. But then when you take into account everything else he's done and what he is doing now, being involved in this case, it leaves you just with your mouth open like, what do we do with that? So, he's like, yes, it's a kind of an international guarantee of base norms for the protection of children's rights. It's just like, it sounds like, you know, I feed all the kids at the orphanage. It just sounds like the best thing ever, right? He's like, that's what I'm working on. It's the theme that I'm working on now. I'm volunteering to take care of these children too. I don't know what to make of that. I don't know what to make of that, unless it's just trying to make himself look better that he's volunteering taking care of these children. And he just seems, but the fact, this is such a freaky thing, because so far, it seems like the people that Johan has preyed upon have been, it seems like they've been weak-minded and maybe cowardly. And are we saying that Karl is like that? I don't know, because he's very open right now with Karl and Lotte. Like, there's two people here that he may potentially have to kill to keep, you know, his name out of the mud. And they're just random people. And I'm like, that's so fascinating to me, right? Because all of the people we know of that have interacted with Johan so far, with the exception of like Tinma, have been people who have had like weak wills. They've had ties to criminalization. They've, you know, had problems with the justice system and their own like self-worth. Like, they're people that are very like weak constitution. And Johan has taken advantage of that and made them do what he wants to. But Lotte and Karl aren't really weak-willed. I mean, maybe if we're assuming that Karl not telling Schubert about being his son is a sign of weakness, maybe that's where Johan's getting off at. But he spends a lot of time with Karl and Lotte. A lot of time just chit-chatting it up like it's no big deal. And I'm like, to what end? Why are you telling them all this? It doesn't have anything to do with that. I'm just doing it because I like it. Like, he paints himself up to be this Boy Scout, but I'm like, what's the point in telling them all this? And then Lotte's like, no, wait a minute. What about the rest of the story you were telling before? Like, let's go back to this. Let's not get off topic, right? She's like, about Schubert going bankrupt 3 times in the past. And he said, yes, for each of the 3 times, he disappeared for a little while. And when he reappeared, he started back plans to aggressively start his business again. And he just says that so, like, coldly, not even looking at them. Okay, so Schubert has had the idea that he started up 3 times, went to this forest, and came back anew. That seems a lot like the ED, right? Where you go into the forest and the monster comes inside of you and then you can go do good things, but then things go out of whack, so you have to go back, almost like a drug addiction sort of, as well. So part of me wants to think that, I mean, has Johan been here the whole time that he's gone back all 3 times? I don't think so. I don't think that's the case. What's been the point? Is the forest like home of this monster and it's inhabited Schubert? Like, what's the deal? It's interesting. I heard that kind of thing from him while I was doing my part-time job reading to him on Fridays. Did you hear about where he went when he disappeared? He said, yes. And she's like, oh, well, it'd be good if we took him there, right? He's like, there are places that can make anyone better. Like when you watch people's homes from the school's rooftop. And that little connection to Karl, right? Like, so smart, like so instantly smart. So him saying that wherever he went, it made him feel better, it reinvigorated him. And maybe there's nothing malicious about it. Maybe he just went to that forest, got inspired, came back, And there is no monster tied to it. Maybe that's the case. But Johan talks about that there are places that make you feel better, like rooftops. And he connects to Karl, like just that perfect little twist of being like, just get him nailed in. But every time we've seen a rooftop with Johan in the past, it's been tied to something bad, like a monster. So does that really make him feel better? Like when you watch people's homes from a school's rooftop. And I like the Karl's instantly like, oh yeah, okay. And that look between Karl and Johan, where Johan's like, I'm like, do I ship them? But I don't want to ship them because I feel like Karl will die. It's just, I don't know what to think. It's making you question everything because as far as like Tenma and we have known, Johan is terrifying and is capable of doing all these crazy things. But in this episode, he's sitting on a park bench with kids talking to these 2 university students like it's nothing, when 12 episodes ago he was trying to lure Nina to a castle and have a gardener kidnap her. So what? Oh my God. Mr. Coons, it seems one of the sinks is clogged up. So Coons is the butler, and they basically kidnap the master and take him with him. Now, make note, Johan, as far as we know, was not in the vehicle with them. Again, I feel like Johan is almost setting them up to be, if something happens to Schubert, then Johan has set Karl up to get taken in. Because it's like, to set him up. Because it's like, it's so perfect. You had Karl, who is the real son, who finds out that Edmund is faking it. You could easily make the, leap to saying that Karl could have been responsible for Edmund's death because he didn't want him to have the money because he was the actual son. You could say that. But then also you had the idea that the butler just saw Lotte and Karl kidnapping Schubert. So if something happens to him, there's all the motivation and the connection right there. It just, nope. And then they take him. And so we cut back to the fake Margot, who talks about them coming in pairs. That Edmund came with another young man. Can't imagine who it was. Right? That Edmund came with him. And Edmund was with him. And that Johan did the talking. What's amazing is she's not really wooed by Johan. She doesn't seem to be wooed by him. She's like, oh yeah, this kid came in and did the talking, to get the money. So like, what the hell? And then she gives the information. And then they arrive and Karl's like, is this the place? And he's like, where have you brought me? She's like, well, it's Obenberg Forest. We wanted to cheer you up. And they take him to this construction site, which was the forest. So they paved paradise and put up a parking lot, essentially, right? So we have Obenberg Forest. There's now this construction site. Although, before Karl can get out that it's a construction site, Johan stops him. Johan doesn't want to ruin the illusion, right? Because he's like, don't tell him that it's a construction site. That'll ruin what I'm about to do. But it's like, why bring him out here? Was the construction site something that Schubert had approved himself? Was this something of Schubert's own design? That the forest he loved was now getting made into something by his own design, and that was the whole thing? Like, each time he came back from being bankrupt, he was inspired by the forest, and he came back and changed it a little bit? Maybe. And he asks, can you see the lake? And the expressions that this show puts on, the expressions that is put onto Karl and Lotte's face is really good. Because it's the expression of people that are like, I don't want to lie to you, but I'm lying to you kind of expressions, right? Are the autumn colors of the forest beautiful? And they're both like, yes, very much so. And they both look so sad because I know it's such a lie. But that's the thing. Like, if my best friend is a social worker and they're like, and she works with people who are like geriatric or have elderly dementia or Alzheimer's. And her thing was always like, when you have someone that has onset dementia, Alzheimer's, or, you know, has memory loss or things like this, it's like you just go along with it. You don't try to correct them. You don't try to tell them what's wrong or anything. You just go along with it because, like, that's the best thing for them at that point, right? Otherwise, you may confuse them or agitate them in a way that will do more harm than good. So the fact they tell them that, yeah, there's the lake, there's the forest, it's all here, even though it is very much not here. It's literally like a crater and then the construction site. And it's like, what are they even building? I like that there's the two A-frames and then there's like cross cranes that are crosses everywhere, like high symbolism. How we doing? Yeah, it's just, what is this even that they're building? Like, it's a construction site. He's like, what about the wrens, the birds? I can't hear the calling of the wrens. And Carl's like, you know, how can you lie about the sound, right? And he says, I'm very sorry. Because he says then, he's like, this is now a construction site. And that's when Johan's like, no. Can't you hear them? Don't ruin the illusion. Listen very carefully. They are crying so beautifully. And all I can think of is Prince. He's got the purple scarf on. All I can think of Prince is like, this is what it sounds like when doves cry. I was like, that's all. I just went, so I need an edit of somebody editing that in. Please do it. Please do it, someone. But Johan, with the serene face, like, it's one of those things where he convinces Schubert of the forest, right? Convinces him of the forest. It's like one of those things where it's like the truth is what we make it, right? The truth is what we make, which is terrifying that he's able to convince this old man that, yeah, no, everything's fine. Can't you hear the birds? Can't you hear them? Yeah. He says, many apples have fallen in the grove. Now, we picked the dirt off the ground. Where did he get the apple from? Did he have it in his pocket the whole time? Did he have the pocket? Did he have the apple in his pocket? It's green. It seems like he did. Like he carried that with him and it was like a magic trick, right? That he held the apple in his hand. Okay. And then he asks them to come over there. He says, what a sight. The leaves catch the setting sun and look as if they're on fire. The lake is so still, it looks like a mirror. Yeah. Can you see it? Can you believe it? Can you believe that such a splendid sight exists? And Karl, this would be red flag number 3, but Karl's like, how he's able to convince this old man by just like, you believe what you want to believe, right? It's just, God, it's dangerous because of how convincing he is. It's dangerous and it's highly effective. Cause then, yeah, and the old man, he like bites into the apple. And then it's like a reverse Garden of Eden, right? Where in the Bible, like when Eve ate the apple, suddenly they gained knowledge and it ruined paradise. Here it's like a reverse of it. You eat the apple and then you drink the Kool-Aid and you believed whatever he told you. And he says he can see it. He can see it. And he's just sitting there crying about it. And Karl's like, what the fudge is this guy? How can he do it? And then Johan doesn't say anything. Ah! And then we cut back to Richard, who talks about that he called himself Schubert's son. If he had called himself Schubert's son, I would have believed him. So yeah, at that point, Richard's like, who is he? So at that point, it's like, okay, I'm wondering if Karl is figuring out that, oh, Johan is able to convince this old man of many things. Is he going to try to convince him that he's his son now? And I think he's going to take Karl's story that Karl confessed to him and use his persuasive skills to get into Schubert's head that he's his son. He looks like he could be. And then I think he's going to frame Karl and Lotte for the murder of Edmund and get them out of the picture because they're in his way. It makes you really question about Johan, the whole two Johans thing. I still believe it's just one person. I believe that Johan is one person, but I believe he is so complex in his manipulations and so thoroughly, insanely good at persuading others and having this soft charisma. It's kind of like the devil's tongue. It's absolutely terrifying. Like, I don't think it's two people. I think that and here's the thing, Johan may want to make a children's Bill of Rights. Absolutely. He may want to do that. Sure. But he may also be a serial killer too, right? That kind of goes back to Richard. Richard, being an alcoholic and killing a man, but yet still wants to be a good person and be a cop. It's bringing up all these things. Now, with Johan, it's a bit more complicated because Johan has literally, tortured people and made them kill one another. So it adds, a big layer to it. But it's it just makes Johan so hard to read and so complicated. And I need more. I need more on his character. I need more with Johan. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Oh, I need more. And I cannot believe this is going to be a 3-parter. I was really convinced. I didn't know this was going to be a 3-parter. I was like, oh, it'll be fine. We'll just wrap it up in this episode. Just, figure out what's going on with Johan and move on. Oh my God, y'all. So yeah. I don't know what else to make of this, y'all, but I am so freaking excited. Cannot even tell y'all. So yeah. I'm curious to hear your thoughts down below. I hope you like this reaction discussion. I am still reeling at all the Johan content we got. I still need to think about it, but I will very much look forward to your comments. Please, no spoilers, but this episode, whole buddy. So we'll find out. We'll see, but I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more Monster. Bye.